Hey everyone, it's Allie and welcome to Bookmas, and today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read during the month of November. Alright, so if you watched my November TBR, I picked out a lot of books. I was very hopeful that I could get a lot of reading done, and yeah, that did not happen so much. I traveled for almost a week with Thanksgiving, but I did still get 8 books read. And one of them is a thick one. I did finally read Fourth Wing. And looking at this stack, I feel like there were some real highs and then there were some very average reads. So let's go ahead and talk about it. So before we get into it, I will just say that I am very active on Goodreads. I really like this platform, this app, to keep track of my reading. And I'm not someone who does update like with the percentages of how much they've read the book, but you can definitely see much more in real time what I am reading and what I am saying that I want to read. But the first book I read was actually just this little novella. I read it in a few hours, I think. This is from the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder universe, which is a trilogy that I've talked about quite a lot here on this channel. It's probably my favorite YA thriller series. All 3 of those books were 5 stars from me. This Nolla Killjoy was not really 5 stars, and I think especially if you were to read this on its own without having read the trilogy, you would just think this was very okay. But it was a fun little addition, I think, to the universe, and it does serve as a prequel to the stories, and it kind of explains how the main character Pip gets interested in the case that she initially tackles in the first book. I did ultimately give it 4 stars, and basically the whole book is Pip going to her friend's house, and she's there with other friends as well and one of her friend's older brothers. And the older brother is kind of overseeing a murder mystery at the house. So it's one of those, like, you can just order a kit and the person who is overseeing everything, they just read whatever you're supposed to say. All of the people who are coming to the party, they have different characters, personas that they take on. Murder mystery party, that's the phrase that you would use. So the whole book is really just Pip at this murder mystery party, and because it's just a party, it's all fake. It's not like there's anything super serious going on, but you do get these little hints that go back, of course, to the trilogy. And because it's so short, I was definitely interested in it the whole time. But yeah, ultimately, not one I would recommend as a standalone book. Next up was Hotel Magnifique. I just kind of got this on a whim from Book Outlet. I'm very much someone who is drawn to covers. I like to go into books pretty blind, and I very much rely on just the genre and little blurbs to let me know if I want to pick up a book to read. Sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't. This one was actually a very good book, I thought, overall, but for some reason, I remember I just had a really hard time getting into this. I think I literally read this for probably a full week out of the 4 weeks of the month. So this book right here is a big reason that I only, quotes, got to 8 books. And I did only give it a 3.75. I couldn't remember if I ultimately did give it 4, because once I got into it, I did like it. I did like the overall world. There was a lot of fantastical elements. I thought it was a very creative story. It was kind of like Night Circus vibes, so if you read that, you might want to check this out. This is kind of like the young adult version of that, I'd say. In the Night Circus, a circus travels around to different places in the middle of the night, and it's very fantastical. And this is similar vibes except with a hotel. And I would definitely say, like, the writing is not as good as the Night Circus, but still a very enjoyable read. I did really like the 2 main characters. Maybe the problem was just that it was a little bit too long. I think it was nearly 400 pages. Had a hard time getting into it, but it was very cute, so maybe if I had read it at a different point, I would have gotten into it faster and I would have enjoyed it more. So I wouldn't say run to this, but if you could get it for pretty cheap, or if you are someone who really enjoyed the Night Circus, I would check it out. Next up is actually another one that I had a pretty difficult time getting into, and that is Lark, which I hadn't really seen anybody talk about this book, at least not the people that I follow on Bookstagram or BookTube, but apparently the author of this book, Alex Astor, is the most followed author on Instagram. And this was another one that I went into pretty blind. I got this for just a few bucks on Book Outlet. And when I went on to give my review, I was so surprised to see an overwhelming amount of 1-star reviews and then like a scattering of 5-star reviews. and not really any in the middle. This was one of the lowest rated books of the year for me, if not the lowest. I did give this 3 stars, and I really never give anything less than 3 because usually, at least, even if I didn't like a book, I can see why others would, or I think that the writing was pretty solid and the book is good enough to get 3 stars. And even though I very rarely DNF books, if something was going to be less than 3 stars, for me, based on how I rate, I would just DNF it. But once I saw all those 1-star reviews, I looked a little bit more into everything, and it seems like people really don't like this author personally because she may be a little bit full of herself. I don't know, she thinks she's a little bit hotter of a writer than she is. The book was extremely average. Again, I don't think this deserved 1 star. I think that is a little bit harsh of people to really give any book 1 star. That's just my personal opinion. As someone who writes myself, that is very harsh, I think, to give somebody 1 star when they put so much effort into something, because it does take so much effort to get a book published. But yeah, people have an immense amount of hate for this book, so maybe just look a little bit more into it if you were thinking about reading it. It's a romantasy book, and what I will say is that even though I didn't think it was absolutely terrible by any means, I think there are so many other better options that I just wouldn't really waste your time reading this. This book was compared to The Hunger Games, and I really would not say it was that similar to The Hunger Games at all. Basically, there are these different groups of people, and each group of people have a certain power, and they were all cursed at a point in the past, like 1,000 years in the past or something, which affects them all in different ways. And once every certain point in time, I forget exactly how long, like every 100 years or so, the leader of each group comes together and they're trying to break this curse. And part of that does involve trying to kill each other, but it was like not that much. A lot of it was just kind of conversation. I don't know, there definitely are a lot of different things going on throughout the book, but I didn't really think it was that action-packed. So like I said, just look into it a little bit more if you wanted to read it, but ultimately I would say pass on it. All right, so after that, after those last few, I was definitely itching for a thriller. Thrillers, I feel like, get me out of a reading rut, which I feel like those last 2 books kind of put me in, to be honest. So I read All the Missing Girls by Megan Miranda, who is quickly becoming one of my favorite authors in the thriller genre. Some I do like more than others, but I think all of her books, I've read 3 so far, all of them got at least 4.5 stars from me, and maybe 2 of them I did end up giving 5 stars. So this one was super interesting, and I didn't like it at first, but I did understand how it all came together. So the main character, Nicolette, she is coming back to her small hometown. It's been 10 years. She left when she was 18. So she comes back 10 years later to help take care of her dad, and another girl ends up missing. So the first part of the story is when you find out the girl is missing, and then each chapter is going back in time day by day. So it does get a little bit confusing at times, but I did appreciate that the author kind of took a risk with the way that she wrote the book, and I think it really did pay off. So out of the books that I've read by Megan Miranda, this was not my personal favorite, but I do still think it was great and worth reading. Next up was another one that was unfortunately a little bit of a dud for me, but I do think it was a nice atmospheric read for November. Just look at that beautiful cover. This is a middle grade story called Ravenfall by Kaylin Josephson. I did give this 3.75 stars. It was very quick read, it was cozy, but I just didn't love the story overall. I found myself just kind of wanting to get through it. I wasn't really excited to see how it ended. I wasn't like uber impressed by how it ended. This is one that I think if I read it when I was like 12 or so, I would have liked it much more. A really good middle grade book, I think, is one that really defies all ages. It's a really good story, no matter if it's a 12-year-old reading it or an 85-year-old reading it, but this is one that really is best, I think, for its intended audience. The main character is 13-year-old Annabella, and she lives with a family who runs an inn. I feel like so many books, it's like a family who runs an inn, but it's very cozy. And all the people in her family, including her twin sisters, they all have these different abilities, and it's kind of the classic coming of age. The main character doesn't know what her ability is yet. And then this boy, Colin, who's 14 years old, he shows up at the inn, the Ravenfall Inn, and he's looking for his lost brother. So the 2 of them kind of band together, which I do really enjoy that. I like when it's like a boy character and a girl character and they band together and they're trying to solve all these problems, and that actually is a similar theme in another book that was 5 stars that we'll talk about in a second. But I do really like that. I just wasn't that impressed with the overall story. All right, and then next we have Fourth Wing, which it's kind of sad. Like, I feel like I read this book in about the same time as I read some of those other much shorter ones because I did really enjoy the reading experience with this one. I actually like this a lot more than I expected because I have a lot of friends who are my age, like in their early 30s, who read this when it first came out in July or whenever it came out. And I did want to read it very close to when it came out, but I just could not get my hands on a copy. And by the time I finally did, I figured I would wait until November because I thought I would read Iron Flame this month too. I was expecting to kind of just read them back to back, but I decided I am just gonna wait on that one until probably January, but I do own that book and I am excited to read it. But yeah, anyway, a lot of my friends said like, it's very good, but it's like kind of cheesy. So I was expecting to not love it as much as other people did. And I for sure will not say like this is my new favorite book or anything like that, but I did really like the world. It was much better written than I expected. And I just liked the dragons and I liked all the challenges and things like that. And surprisingly, I liked the first third of the book the best. I feel like books like this, especially books that are going to be a part of a larger series, the first part of the book will be like quite slow and then you really get into it. And then the ending is like the most exciting part. The first third of it was the most interesting to me because there were a lot of like challenges going on and everything was like really intense. So I commend the author for starting the book off with a bang. But then the middle was a little bit slow and then the ending I just thought was like pretty okay, but I'm for sure interested in finding out what happens next. The biggest thing that I'll say about this book, and this is coming from someone who is not a romance girly, I think this book would have been 5 stars for me if it was fantasy with like a side of romance. This is definitely a romantasy where romance is like heavily intertwined with the story. It was kind of odd to me because it almost felt like 2 different people were writing this book because the parts where there really was no romance going on, I thought it was like really well written, the dialogue was good, the characters were really good, but there'd be like really intense scenes going on and then the main character, the girl, would be like looking at the guy she's interested in and just be like, oh, he's so hot. Like it just didn't meld very well to me. It did not seem realistic at all that you would be paying attention to that when there's like such harsh things going on because people are dying left and right in this book. And then I certainly did not personally like the couple open door sexual scenes. So if you don't like that, just know that that is in here, but I found it very easy to just skip those 2 chapters. And there's someone that I follow on Instagram. I think she's the real life book reviewer. She reads a lot of romance, but she doesn't like to read open door sex scenes either. So she actually will like put that in her reviews, like skip these certain chapters or skip these certain pages. And so I really pay attention to what she says, but I'm sure you could also Google that if you don't like to read that either. So yeah, I think it would have been 5 stars if it was much heavier on the fantasy, much smaller on the romance, but I know a lot of people do love the romantasy books. With all that being said, I did ultimately give it 4.5 stars and I am excited to read the next one. I did go a little bit rogue, I'm realizing. I didn't completely stick to my November TBR because this one and also that Megan Miranda thriller I had not originally picked out. I picked out a ton of fantasy and I just realized as I was reading through these books that I can do like maybe 1 or 2 fantasy straight and then I need something a little more grounded in reality. Love fantasy, but yeah, I like need a break from it. Anyway, this is one I had been really wanting to read for quite a while and I just felt like picking it up. This is All Good People Here by Ashley Flowers. And if that name sounds familiar to you, she is one of the biggest podcasters around at the moment. She is the host of Crime Junkies and I think probably a couple other podcasts, or she's like the producer on at least a few other podcasts now. And I really wanted to read this book because her podcast is about true crime and I just feel like she writes really good scripts for that podcast. She has a really just natural writing voice, so I was expecting her book to be very, very good. And I will say that I liked the story. It was kind of like a cold case. It was jumping back and forth. in different times, and I really like stories in all genres that do that. But I didn't think the writing was like exceptional by any means, and this is her debut novel, so I'm sure she would just continue to get better and better over time. But I wasn't blown away. Ultimately, I did give it 4 stars. I would recommend it, especially if you do like Ashley Flowers. And it's not a super long read either. It's, yeah, about 300 pages. I did read this in probably just about a day and a half. All right, and then finally we ended with the only 5-star of the month. I have gotten a little bit harsher in my rating just because I'm reading so much more than I used to. I feel like I used to fling out the 5 stars a little more readily, but now I give a lot more, like 4, 4.5. And this one I almost gave 4.5, but honestly, I really enjoyed it. And so I did give it the 5 stars. This is The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. And the nice thing is that there are a couple books in this, I think maybe 2 main books and then like some novellas. And I actually already have the second book. I got both of these from Book Outlet just this season. So I am always a little bit nervous when I get a couple books in a series before even reading the first one, but I am extremely eager to read the second one already. I'm a huge lover of fairy tales, especially dark fairy tales. I loved Fairy Tale by Stephen King. I read that last year. That was one of the best books I read that year for sure. Probably one of the best books I've read in the last few years. And this kind of felt like a YA version of that. There were some really dark elements to it, and it's similar to Stephen King's Fairy Tale in that there are parts that are grounded in our reality, and then there's like a separate world that the main character goes into where there are dark fairy tales going on. So I do think if you liked Stephen King's book, I would recommend picking this one up. I don't think you'll like it as well as that, but it was similar energy for sure. So in this book, the main character is 17-year-old Alice. She and her mom have kind of been on the run all throughout her life. They have bad luck that follows them kind of wherever they go. And Alice's grandmother was a recluse author who wrote this collection of dark fairy tales, and there's like no copies of this fairy tale around anymore. So that's kind of the background of the family. And the last place that Alice is in, I think, is New York. And she befriends this guy, Ellery Finch. They both go to the same school and they both are kind of misfits in different ways. Alice's mom ends up getting kidnapped, and they think it is in connection with these fairy tales and the grandmother. And so Ellery and Alice go off on this grand adventure to try to find this mystical land that her grandmother apparently visited to write her stories and also get her mother back. So I thought the overall story was really strong, but I also just liked the writing style a lot. I really liked the main character. I liked Ellery Finch. I really liked the main character's inner voice. She was kind of sassy and sarcastic. And yeah, it just overall was a 5-star book for me. That book did win a lot of awards actually when it first came out in 2018. So I was surprised to see that a lot of people considered it more of like a 3 to a 4 book. So it might not be for everybody, but again, if you did like Stephen King's Fairy Tale, you might like this. Not as good, but it will be worth reading, I think. Well, all right, everyone, that was everything that I did read in November. I am fully into reading mode now. I'm so enjoying the Christmas season, this month of December, and I'm just finding that I really want to curl up and read in the evenings and the early mornings now. So I think I got out of my early November reading slump, and I'm fully back into it. And if you are interested in following my reading journey, make sure to follow me on Goodreads as well as my Instagram, which is the same name as this YouTube channel, Cozies and Classics. And here on YouTube, I will be posting every other day from now until Christmas. So if you like cozy Christmas content as well as book content, of course, make sure you do subscribe. And if you like this video, I would appreciate you giving it a thumbs up as well. It really does help my channel out a lot. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.